Okay, today's guest is someone who's been a major voice for medical freedom and informed consent. I have Bigtree with me. You started out as a producer on the TV show The Doctors, but then you realized that there were some stories that you weren't allowed to tell, especially about vaccine safety. So you walked away from the mainstream media and started speaking out. You have founded the ICAN, the Informed Consent Action Network, something I've been donating to for years, back in my AOL email address. That's how long. And your show, The Highwire, has reached millions of people around the world with uncensored health information. You're also one of the people behind the documentary Vaxxed and Vaxxed 2, which really opened up the conversation about, that the media has tried to shut down about vaccine safety. So you've also taken on the CDC, the FDA, and other agencies in court and won. You're a truth teller, a fighter for families. I'm so excited that you are here today. So welcome.
Cheryl, it's an honor to be here. Thanks for having me.
Now, you were just on vacation. How did that go?
Oh, it was great, actually. I finally, after, the last 3 years have been pretty intense. On top of a lot of the things you listed there, of course, I was Director of Communications for Robert Kennedy Jr., so running that whole gamut with the campaign. So finally, after all of that was through, and I love the results and how it worked out with him at HHS, I finally took the kids. We went to the Grand Canyon, went camping, spent some time in Arizona and Utah, and it was lovely. It was really good to get back to nature and stare up at some, big towering red walls that do not care who the President of the United States is. It puts it all back in perspective. Trees and rocks that do not care about all the things that we're stressing about.
Yes, kind of makes you look at like, wow, hundreds of years ago on this land, what was happening? It definitely wasn't people fighting over the president. Well, I mean, well, they were fighting over other things.
Not thousands of years ago and not millions of years ago.
Definitely not. Well, Del, I started watching your show, The Highwire, at least 5 years ago. I've told you this before, I was a government worker. I had finally reached my six-figure salary. I had a pension coming my way. I had one child in daycare at the time. I did all the things that the normies do. After watching The Highwire, I quit my job, started homeschooling the kids. I've been kicked out of our pediatrician's office. I am missing teeth in my mouth that once had root canals in them. I am an ivermectin drug mule for my family. And we're drinking raw milk. I've got chickens, so it's been a wild ride. So I want to thank you, though, because it is so much more fulfilling to be on this side and not living in the matrix anymore. I live my days for us now, not what everybody else wants out of me. So thank you for that. But I do want to get back to your roots. What made your mom decide to homeschool you?
Yeah, well, I'm glad we're going there because, as you listed off those things, I often, as I speak on stages all across the country and sometimes the world, I always like to go back and just say, I think a lot of the reasons I'm where I'm at, I was homeschooled, and I always say to the audience, so if you're doing that with your kids, be careful because they're probably going to find themselves in the same amount of trouble I find myself in. And it sounds like you've done just about the same. The homeschool thing happened. It's a story I love to tell. First of all, my parents were absolutely hippies from the 1960s. They marched in Chicago during the famous Chicago 7 moment and always had stories about that, fighting for what they believed was freedom of education, freedom of speech. And then when we were born, my parents were just very, very conscious parents, as I would say. I would not win any pity party when I'm sitting with friends and they're all talking about how terrible their parents were, how awful they were treated. I'm the exact opposite. I had parents that were just super conscious of us as children and saw that job of raising us was the most important one they were ever going to do. My parents were beginning a spiritual journey really together. And so a lot of what, I was taught to meditate when I was, 3, 4 years old. My parents would say to me, you're here to change the world, to make the world a better place. And you're capable of anything that you can dream as long as you keep a clear connection to God and never let anyone get in between that. They raised me to always question authority, which is a difficult thing to do as a parent, right? I mean, when you do that, the only authority that child's going to see for the first 18 years are the parents. And so when they're saying it doesn't matter, what they would say to me, doesn't matter if it's a professor or a senator, If they're asking you to do something that does not, align with your intuition and what you think is right, don't do it. And so that was like from the very beginning, um, parents were focused on me. And then they still, I was in school around third grade. I was going to the public school in our local neighborhood in Boulder, Colorado, and my sister and I would walk to school every day. It was about, I don't know, a mile or so, maybe 6, 7 blocks. Back when you could walk to school with a kindergartner and a third grader by themselves, and the parents wouldn't be arrested. Remember those days?
Yeah.
And so we would come home for lunch. Most days, my mom didn't want us eating the crappy food at the school or even borrowing it from friends. We were the only ones that were like organic. We were grinding our own wheat flour, making our own bread. My mom made her own mayonnaise. So take homemade bread and put homemade mayonnaise, and we get this. If you did walk to school with your lunch, it was just this soggy mess that was falling apart by the time lunch came around. Anyway, one day, my sister and I were returning for lunch, and I walked in the door. My mom said, what happened to the T-shirt you were wearing when you went to school? And I'm not sure she was always aware of the shirts I was wearing, but this one in particular, that morning, I'd made an art class the week earlier where we were using batik dyes and putting wax on the shirt and different colors of dye, and I managed to spell my gymnastics team. I was really proud of it. No one else attempted lettering, and I wrote Flyers, which was the name of my gymnastics team, and so I was really proud of it, and I wore it to school. But I wasn't wearing it when I came home for lunch, and when my mom asked, what happened to your shirt? I said, oh, Craig said it looked stupid, and he lived right next door to the school, so I just ran over and borrowed one of his T-shirts. And my mom pulled me out of school immediately. We never returned to that school from lunch. And I remember her saying to me, I am never going to raise kids that care what other people think. You were proud of that shirt, you walked out with that shirt, and you let somebody else undermine your confidence in something you created, something you believed in. That is not going to be the way I want you to live in this world. And so she set about from that moment on in instilling a confidence and a connection, constant connection with Source. And I would say I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing today or be who I am today if it wasn't for the attention that was given, and this idea that we were capable of just incredible achievements if we just really recognize that we were created in the image and likeness of God, that we have the ability to create, and that we're in a dance with all the things that God's created on this earth. And so my brother and sister were raised, in the same house. We were all homeschooled. And I would say in many ways they've all done very well. My brother ended up being, president of the entire church, Unity Church system that my father was a minister in, and my sister's taking over my father's church. I was the only one that didn't become a minister. I think it's clear that I have a ministry. It just wasn't what I wanted to be focused on. And so I very much enjoy the work that I'm doing. But I think, people say, how do you do what you do? How are you brave enough to do what you do, and the things like that? And I would say just tell your children that they're here to change the world and make it a better place every day of their life, and watch what they start believing is possible. And I just want to make one more thing clear that I think is important, because my father would always say to me, let me be clear, you are no more special than every other person that's on this planet. We are all brothers and sisters here. We are all equally created by God. But the way we are raising you, you're going to appreciate the power and majesty of your life more than most, which is going to put you at an advantage. And he said, never use that to have advantage over people. Have it over ideas. Make the world a better place. Don't use it to inflict pain. And so when I went off to Hollywood to be in film and television, my father's last words to me was, Hollywood demeans people. They usually do shows and make films that, undermine the beauty of humanity. If you're going to go there, lift us up. And so that was always sort of a message that I carried through most of the things that I did. And it was many, many years before I found the work that I'm doing now. But I will say that always stayed true inside of my heart.
And that's hard to do. How did your parents, I struggle with that with my son, trying to get him to appreciate things. It's unless, if you can take them to go do mission work in other countries, or even in cities that, are less fortunate, that's something, probably that would be effective. But how did your parents instill that in you and really show you that you have so much to appreciate. It's very easy in this world to, my son thinks it's like a tragedy if I take away his dirt bike and all he has left to ride is a four-wheeler.
Yeah,
How did they do
right.
that?
Yeah. I ask the same questions of myself as I'm raising my own children. My son's 16 now. My daughter is 11 years old. And I, think back, I didn't enjoy the meditating when I was 5 years old. It was just something that they were just putting in. It was like brushing your teeth. It's just something we're going to do. And eventually you'll seek, the value that it brings, even though you may not understand it now. And I think that there's a lot of those things that were sort of just put in as habit, which were important, but probably most importantly, I think what our kids are really learning from is us, and how we're living our lives. And I think I probably reflected more as I got older on what would my father be doing here? What would my mother, how would they be in this situation? And they always treated their life with inspiration, but were able to really be great at, sort of that prayer of serenity, knowing the mountains that they could move and the ones that they couldn't, and having acceptance and grace in the difficult times while being passionate and driven in the things that they could do something about. And so I think that in the end, that's, one of the questions that I always get in the work that I do is, are you afraid for your life? Are you afraid, what could happen to you or the attacks that come on you? And the only time that you think about it is your children, my wife and my children. But then I realized that they chose me. They chose to be a part of this family. And ultimately, the greatest gift that I can give them is just for them to witness a life of someone that woke up passionately at 4 o'clock in the morning every day, excited for that day, excited for the work that I could do, and committed to, making the world a better place, saving children's lives, trying to get the truth out. And so I think that that's all we have, right, is you give the lessons, you try and create habit. But if you're not living that life, right, if you're not challenging your life, if your children are watching you go to a job you hate every day, you despise your boss, you feel like a slave, but you're doing it for your children, I would say stop immediately, because they're watching you. And if you don't want them to have that feeling of enslavement, then they can't witness you going through that either. And so I think the greatest lessons we give our kids is how we're living our own lives.
So true. Now, I know you and your wife, who I got to meet, I had the pleasure of meeting her at the Food Farm Freedom Convention as well. You guys started a school for homeschoolers, correct? What inspired
We
that?
did. We sort of, we have gone through different, we were homeschooling right when we released Vaxx, and then I went out on the road, but it was a lot for my wife to handle on her own. And so then we decided the closest thing to homeschooling would be a Waldorf curriculum. So our children started at Waldorf in California. Eventually we left and ended up in Austin, Texas in 2019. And we were at the Waldorf there. And then COVID hit, and suddenly Waldorf became very un-Waldorf-like, I don't know for people out there that aren't aware of that, teaching, but Rudolf Steiner, the founder of Waldorf, could be arguably the first anti-vaxxer alive, was discussing how he believed vaccines would be used to rob the soul from children in the future back in late 1800s, early 1900s. So he was on it before anyone. So when that school started believing in masking and social distancing and putting people behind computer screens to learn, which Waldorf was also anti-technology. It was just everything it believed in. That's when we decided to sort of defect from that school. We left with 5 other families and said, well, let's start a homeschool pod together. We'll hire some teachers and we'll bring all of our kids together. And that's what we did. And we found a property to do that. Only that pod ended up being about 60 children as the next school year started. A lot of people followed us into that. And it was really fascinating because I didn't really think about the fact that a school like that, or a homeschool pod like that, really is a community builder. And many of our friends from California that hadn't left yet ended up coming to Texas to be a part of that. So in many ways, it drew in our community, and we met, we have great new friends now because of it. Mickey Willis and his family and other creative people all sort of ended up in this divine experiment. So yeah, we started, it was called Raphael Springs, and that continued to nurture that. That's gone on, is a thriving school, and now, we're trying different things. Ever is going to get more into a sports oriented school, but it's been great. And I'll say this, all the kids that came out of that aged out of that pod that we'd created and had to go into middle or high school, all the ones that I know of anyway that tracked in the same schools with Ever, they're all straight A, valedictorian level students. So anyone that's afraid of raising children that way with, less structure and let them follow their own goals, I've never had to tell Ever to do his homework ever. I mean, he does it on his own and gets incredible grades. And so it really does work when you let children work from their inspiration. Give them some guidance, of course, but they've all proven to be really brilliant students.
Man, that's amazing. Do you think that one of the reasons people so easily trust the government and the medical authority is because of the way that the traditional school system trains us to sort of just obey and not question?
Yeah, I absolutely believe that is the case. I think it's designed that way. And Rudolf Steiner, that was exactly his point. Your children are being designed like factory workers to rise when they hear a bell, take a break, or go to the next class, hear a bell, and sit down. They are being turned into assembly workers. And to never question authority, questioning your teacher, questioning what's happening there is not celebrated at all by the education system. In fact, I take a step further. I was interviewing Suzanne Humphreys, who wrote the book Dissolving Illusions, which I think is one of the best books looking back at the polio vaccine and smallpox vaccine, which is where that whole program begins. But I was saying to her, she was a nephrologist, kidney doc, like top in her field. And I said, what is it about med school that seems to train the critical thinking out of doctors, which is something we all saw during COVID? Why would doctors suddenly, force remdesivir on people, and all it was doing was causing kidney failure, putting them on ventilators where 9 out of 10 of them were dying, denying them ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine, where anyone watching my show or watching anything that was happening around you, you recognize that these were products that worked. How was it doctors could just be so easily misled and frankly be used to murder, whether purposefully or accidentally, I think hundreds of thousands of people in America and millions around the world? But I said to her, what is it that takes away their critical thinking? And she said, well, on the contrary, the education system, higher education, like for doctors, it weeds out those that critically think. As you go through that process, if you keep asking questions or challenging your teacher, you're not going to get good grades, good enough to continue on your doctorate journey. Also, you're only being tasked with cut and paste. Can I remember all the right things that were in the textbook and just reiterate them like a parrot? Exactly. It's not asking for us to be critical thinking beings. It used to. It used to be a doctor was a detective that would listen to their patient and try to figure out what unique thing was going on. That's no longer the case. Most doctors would tell you that died, over a decade ago. Now it's just whatever the CDC says. It's a cut and paste, mostly written by the drug agencies. And so I think, as we look to the future, what are our children going to be? And when you go to a Waldorf school, they give you a book of all of the heads of the technology companies that built your computer, that built your phone, that created AI. None of them are letting their kids use those things. Either they're homeschooling them or they're sending them to Waldorf schools where they're not allowed to touch any technology at all. That should give you a pause, because what you want are children that can inspire themselves, they can self-create, they can set their own schedules, and they can figure things out using their own skill set. And so I think all of those things are critical, and none of that is taught in school. And lastly, I think just look at history. I think about this a lot because I did go back into high school. I went to a public school after being homeschooled up until that point. And I think about the teachers that I saw there teaching history, and all history was on what date did Columbus blah, 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 on what date did George Washington cross the river. It was just dates, dates, dates. What they never, but then you watch like a series on HBO like John Adams, where they tell the personal story, and you recognize that history should be showing you that almost every time, every page in a history book is written are stories about insurmountable odds. People that believed that they were being guided by God and faith most often, and just stood in the face of adversity and absolutely pulled off miracles. Miracles, one after another, by their own belief in themselves, their ability to lead, yet we never hear any of that. Instead, it's just reduced to a date because the school doesn't want you to believe that as an individual, you're powerful enough to make a difference in this world. Instead, our school is telling us you aren't important. The good, the greater good of the body of humanity is important. Frankly, it's socialism at best and communism at worst, but it's not what founded this nation. And frankly, it's not probably what's written in any history book in the world, certainly not this country. This country is, think about it. Have you ever read, we outnumbered them, 100-1 and the battle lasted 45 minutes? Never read that story. You've never read that. That's not what goes in the pages of history. What goes in the pages of history is people that just said, I know it looks like we're all going to die here on paper, but I know right now I have a sense of providence that if we cross this river in the freezing cold and we take out the soldiers, on the other side, that will change the course of history, and it does. That's what you want to be teaching your children, the inspiration that you actually, in many ways, with a group of people, but standing in your greatness, you have the possibility to be a world changer. They don't want that to be a thought, really, of any citizen right now in America, and certainly not in the rest of the world.
Absolutely not. That's why we use the Tuttle Twins books. I do a lot of work with the Tuttle Twins. I love them. I've had both Connor and Elijah on the podcast. I've also had on Alex Newman, which you had on. You were on vacation, but he was on the Highwire a couple weeks ago. And Alex's book, Indoctrinating Our Children to Death, really gets into that, how it's socialism at best, communism at worst, and he outlines
Right.
everything in the school system that is attributing to that. So when you worked on the doctors, now you weren't allowed to cover certain stories because of sponsorship pressure. Do you think that kind of censorship is happening across the board? Like, we can definitely assume that it's happening in politics.
Yes.
What about hospitals, media, and do you think it's even happening in our schools?
Yeah, well, I think, look, it doesn't matter whether at this point the funding is, coming from pharma. In many ways it is. The pharmaceutical industry is the most powerful lobby in Washington. It outspends oil and gas as a lobby 2-to-1. So it's spending twice as much money buying up politicians than even the groups that we fight wars in the Middle East for. So that gives you a sense of where that's at. 50 to 70% of all television advertising is funded by the pharmaceutical industry, which means every single news anchor essentially is working for pharma, and every director and creative writer in mainstream television especially is working for the pharmaceutical industry. What people don't realize is when you work in television, we discuss it. It's why, you have the Nielsen ratings or whatever rating system they're using to value the show throughout every 15 minutes, every quarter, how much retention you're getting. Why does that matter to them? Because that television is only a billboard. That is all that it is. It's an electronic billboard that's in every house across America, and that show is only there to keep your eyes on that billboard so that when it flashes, they sell products to you. And that's what it is. And if your show doesn't hold enough eyeballs to sell those ads, your show is pulled. So it's all owned by the advertisers, and when the advertising becomes more than 50% of it is all by one industry, you start getting a sense of what's running your industry. When you look at the hospitals, look at the wings, look at who donated a wing to that hospital, where did that money come from, what's going on there. When you look at the textbooks, who's funding the textbooks in the universities? The pharmaceutical industry. So who's writing your textbooks? The pharmaceutical industry. What is medicine? It is really essentially now drug pushing. It is there, it is let us train you how to be a professional legal drug pusher. And now America consumes, the greater body. I think it's something like 60% of the drugs in the world are consumed by us. what are we, 4% of the world's population? I mean, it just gives you a sense of how out of control this is. But in the end, that television, the value that has had is it's a 24-hour-a-day, mantra, if you will. It's a religion that is making you, it is brainwashing you with a constant message that you are just a body of parts that get sick and need to be put together by somebody else, by a doctor, by a drug, by a hospital, by a surgery. Get the next great drug, instead of you recognizing that you are created in the image and likeness of God, that you have an innate connection and an immune system and a body that is designed to heal itself. So all of that. So none of that is getting through the school. No one in school is teaching your children about the power of the body and what it can overcome and how it's designed to heal. Instead, I think now 1 in 4 children is leaving elementary school on a drug they're going to be on the rest of their lives. Oftentimes, those drugs are being recommended by your school counselor that doesn't even have a medical degree, or the school nurse, anxiety drugs or Ritalin. We are just destroying the future of our children. And we're at the precipice of a moment where this generation now of children, nearly half of them will never have had a sober day in their lives. And I'm sorry if your kids are on Ritalin, they're drug addicts. They are on drugs. They never know what it's like to be sober. If they're on SSRIs, they've never known what it's like to be sober. What happens to a society where the children were drugged their entire lives, have never learned how to handle any emotion, any issues, any difficulties? Instead, there was always a drug that could fix the problem. We've only seen the beginning of the issues that are arising around a nation that's designed that way.
Yeah, they did it to me. I went in for, this or that, and you should get on an SSRI, and I was like 20 something. Okay, yeah, make you happy, relax, okay. But yeah, and I'm now in my 40s. I'm like, okay, what can I do to undo this damage? So I'm intermittent fasting right now. I didn't really do a deep dive in it, but I was like, give it a whirl.
Yeah.
Your body's supposed to get rid of all of the bad cells after a certain amount of hours.
Yeah, little autophagy might help there. Right, exactly.
Yes, exactly. So, okay, I loved what you just talked about with the billboard. I actually stole that quote to read to you to ask you more questions on it, because you just did a fantastic interview with Alex Clark on the Culture Apothecary podcast. So for any parent that's listening today and thinks, what do you mean I need to question vaccines for? I didn't even know I had to question this. Where do I begin? I would send them straight to that episode, because that's like the most recent thing that I've seen you do that really outlines it from the beginning in such a fantastic way. So I'm going to link that episode to these show notes. So anybody, it's 2 hours, so worth your time.
It was really thorough.
Yes, she was. And I loved how she just came at it from like the skeptic, but also she knew what she was talking about. So.
Look, I told her, ask as hard a question as you can think of. I enjoy the challenge of it, but I've looked at this long enough, and we're in an issue now where, as I say on that podcast, one of the head psychologists of the WHO during a very important meeting, trying to figure out how to stop vaccine hesitancy. Her name's Heidi Larson. She said, we all know that a doctor and a nurse are lucky if they get a half-a-day education on vaccines. That is the deplorable situation. So anyone that is afraid to challenge their doctor, the reason your doctor gets so frustrated with you when you ask them is they have no knowledge whatsoever. They really don't understand how they work. They don't know what's in them. They don't understand the immune system. They weren't trained that way. They are just going through a ritual, if you will. It's more like a religion where they learn how to put the little cracker on your tongue and give you the little wine, and you do it, and they wipe the glass. That's what they've been taught. They have no idea what they're actually doing, how it works. And I know that's shocking for people that really want to believe that white lab coat means something. What it means is actually a lack of education on one of the biggest decisions you're ever going to make in your life.
Yeah. It means that you bought a degree. You bought it.
Yeah.
It's not even earned. You bought it. So, all right. So I know you're titled the anti-vaxxer from media and whatnot, but I've never actually heard you tell people don't get vaccines. You are very clear that you want people to listen to the facts and choose what's best for your lifestyle and your comfort level. So that's exactly what informed consent is supposed to be. But I think the problem is most people don't even understand what informed consent is. I know I didn't until I started watching your show.
Yeah.
So can you kind of explain what informed consent is, how it relates to the 86 National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act? And then do you think schools and the media are deliberately keeping us in the dark that we have this right to informed consent?
Yeah, so informed consent is actually, I guess, a medical term. It's defined in the Nuremberg Code. This is after the Nuremberg trial of the doctors from Nazi Germany that were testing drugs and surgeries and all sorts of things on innocent people that had not agreed to it. Obviously, they were in concentration camps. But throughout that trial, when it was all over and many of those doctors were hung and executed, and by the way, their argument was simply we were just doing what we were told to do by our government or by the head of our hospital or whatever was going on. So ignorance obviously is not a defense, and it didn't work for those doctors. But when it was all over, the free nations of the world got together and said, how do we make sure that that never happens again? And so they created the Nuremberg Code, which is a set of rules by which all of modern medicine adheres. And the number one, very first rule is informed consent. Basically states that the voluntary consent of the patient is critical in all medical decisions, and that consent can only be found if they are fully educated on all of the benefits of whatever product or procedure is taking place and all of the potential side effects and negatives. And after they've heard all sides of what is possible, they then get to decide whether they consent or not. And this is one of the issues that's, already we're not getting consent. They're not handing you those side effects that you'll read on a carton of cigarettes. You have to read it in almost every other product, but you're not seeing it on vaccines, which I believe should be considered illegal. Certainly, it's shirking the job that they're supposed to be doing. But even if they were handing you all of that, the mandates that exist to, in order to go to school, which are really only now in 5 states where you can't opt out of it. Right, and this is part of the work that I do with the Highwire and our nonprofit Informed Consent Action Network. We're winning back the right to be able to exempt out. We won in Mississippi, I think it's nearly 2 years ago. They got their religious exemption back after not having had it since the 1970s. We just won an injunction this week in West Virginia where we're getting very close to returning the religious exemption to West Virginia. Also, I think they lost it before Mississippi. But there's Connecticut, New York, and Maine, and California amongst those that are still holding out to force you to go to school. Well, let me put it this way. They're coercing you, which that word is actually in informed consent. No form of coercion is allowed. Coercion being, if you don't take this medical product, you can't go to school. That's the definition of coercion. So I would say the mandate, and everywhere it's enforced, is in direct violation of the Nuremberg Code. And so I think that, in all honesty, as you've said, I believe this is a free country, and we all do different things when we raise our children. I take my children skiing as soon as they can walk almost. I think at like 3.5, maybe 4, I was teaching my daughter how to ski and my son because I grew up skiing. For many, that's dangerous. For many, I'm putting my children at risk, and they may want to say, you shouldn't be allowed to do that. But all over Switzerland and everywhere else in the world, that's how you're raised. We should be allowed to raise our children the way we were raised. You shouldn't be forced to do things by the government and how you raise your children. And so that is what I'm fighting for, is your right to choose, not to remove vaccines from the planet. I'm fighting every day, and all the work that I do with our nonprofit is so that you have the right to choose. Vaccines are the only product that have no liability. The liability has been protected by the government, so the government steps in and protects this industry. You don't really have a recourse. There's a kangaroo court. You go and fight the government. Robert Kennedy Jr. is speaking about that as we speak. He just put out a lot of tweets this week saying he's going to change a system, this kangaroo court that basically uses the Department of Justice lawyers, the unending supply of funds to the Department of Justice, paid for by taxpayers, to fight innocent people in court to make sure that they cannot win a lawsuit because of the injury from vaccines. This whole thing has been turned on its head. So, and as they said, back in 1986 when the law was passed. We are losing so much money from death and injury cases, we cannot make a profit. That's why we protected them from liability. But ask yourself, as you see them losing cases on drugs that kill people, why they make money from drugs and don't need liability protection. So what is it about vaccines? We need to just return to normal marketplace standards. Let the market decide whether this is a great product. Let people sue if it hurts them. And watch manufacturers compete with each other to make a better product. These products are not evolving because they can't be sued. And they're not challenging. You don't see new versions of MMR. You're not seeing new versions of chickenpox because they're locked in. They don't have to pay for advertising because they're forced on you. They don't have to pay any legal fees because they're protected from liability.
Yeah, definitely. I'm in New York, so I don't think Cuomo read that part of the
No.
Nuremberg Code.
Right.
He does not care. He does not care. But yeah, I'm happy to help you out with whatever you need help with in New York here, right near Albany. So
well, I will tell you right now, we have cases right now in New York itself that may be the most important cases on the issue of medical freedom. They'll probably go all the way to the Supreme Court. So if anyone wants to help with that work, either on our website, thehighwire.com, or our nonprofit, ICANDecide.org, just go up and donate. We're spending millions and millions of dollars fighting cases, especially our favorite one is in New York right now. I won't talk about it or what it is because we don't want to mess up how the judge is handling it in court, but that is the top priority of our nonprofit.
Awesome, and we thank you for that.
The only thing that's changed is the pharmaceutical industry owns our television now, and they've got every newscaster telling you that that's a deadly disease. You know, I always laugh at reporters that tell me that I'm responsible for people dying from measles. And I say, if measles is deadly, how are you even here telling me this? And they said, what do you mean? I said, no, I'd like to know, if measles is so deadly, how are you telling me this? Like, I don't understand. I said, well, can we agree it's like one of the most infectious diseases in the world? Like, yeah. Well, then can we agree that your grandparents and every grandparent on the planet caught this disease? Yeah. Well, then it didn't kill them, and there's 7 point whatever billion people on this earth because all of our, grandparents caught a disease that apparently wasn't deadly enough to come anywhere near stopping the growth of the billions of people on this planet. So, I mean, that's where I came at it from. Every person is going to have to come on their own journey, and all I would say is use your intuition. If it feels right, I wouldn't say go against that. But if it feels wrong, then you have to do your homework now. You're going to have to start looking into things. And the first place I would say to start is ask your pediatrician, or if you don't even want to talk to them, all you have to do is just go to FDA licensed vaccines. You can Google that right now, FDA licensed vaccines. It'll give you the entire list of every vaccine that's been licensed, and then type in another window, CDC childhood vaccine schedule, and get the list. And then say, get the name of the vaccine, go over this list, click on it, and then click on package insert. That warning label I told you that you were supposed to have received and you didn't, and it's all there. You can get it in 5 seconds. If you did it, you're already looking at it right now. And then start reading all that's in it. I would point out the things you want to look at is section 6.1. And every single time, 6.1 is the trials that determine the safety. If you're looking at Vaxx, which is the hepatitis B vaccine given on day 1 of life, you'll read that 147 children were in the entire trial. 147. They were between the age of infant to 10 years old. They weren't all 1 day old. So they didn't even give it to 147 one-day olds. And they were observed for 5 days after injection. That's it. A 5-day safety trial of 147 children is what determined that that product was safe enough to give to everyone in the world. There's not a cancer drug in the world that would ever give it away with that. Even if that cancer patient is stage 4 and about to die, they wouldn't let you take a product that only be tested for 5 days. But they'll give it to your brand new baby. I think that's insane. So start right there. We are letting these industries make such insane amounts of money, and then the one thing we're afraid to do is actually make them liable for them. I mean, come on. If they've got the type of money to buy your governments, to buy the WHO. I mean, look at the funding we're allowing them to have, and they don't even have the decency to allow us to sue them for those of us that are being injured. And so they have, I mean, they've got it all wired in. How we got this far and this out of control is absolutely insane. But look, we're winning. We are turning this giant aircraft carrier of stupidity around. We are getting back to what's reasonable. People are starting to say, I think I should be able to sue. I don't think they should be able to rush these products on the market. I definitely don't think they should have taken people's jobs away for not getting a product, and yet they continue to push it onto your children and try to make money off of it. So look, we have a lot of work to do, and as long as we want to go to sleep and look the other way, then they're going to get away with it. But I think that this is the moment in time. COVID woke up a lot of people. There's a lot of people that are starting to shift their perspective on this. But it's going to take work. It's going to take courage. It's going to take standing up against that mantra of fear that we're all going to die if we don't have pharma. All I want you to do is look around, go to New York City, or if you're in a populated area, look around and realize that we're here as a species, not because of doctors. Doctors have really only been here for 100 years, at least in the modern space, yet our species was doing just fine. It's never been eradicated from this planet. We've managed to take over the planet well enough that everyone's talking, about the same people that are telling you you should be afraid of dying or telling you there's too many people on the planet. So which one is it? Are we dying too quickly, or are there too many of us surviving? They're telling that they're conflicted in their own story here. I think when you look around, we're perfectly capable of surviving, and no one can tell you that's just because we're being vaccinated. In fact, the truth is we're sicker than we've ever been. We are alive, but we have insane amounts of autoimmune neurological disorders. And I think, if you look at the science that I have, you can say clearly autoimmune, your immune system is somehow gone off the Richter scales, attacking your own body. Our gut biome is being destroyed by most of these products. We're not able to eat food. We're not able to breathe the air. We need a course correction right away.
Absolutely. But now they're trying to shield chemical and pesticide companies from being sued. Is that something on your radar?
It is on my radar. We've talked about it a lot. We've, sort of been trying to look at ways to fight this in this legislation, but this shows you the insanity of the world that we live in. I know it feels awkward to walk into a politician's office, but when you do, they know how weird it is. They know how hard it is, and they make an assumption that there must be thousands of you that are not courageous enough to come into the office. And let me remind you this, because I do this all the time, and I was freaked out the first time I did it in Mississippi when I was touring with Vaxx. When you go in and sit in that office, you know what you realize? Oh my God. This guy was just a dentist before he decided to have this job. This guy was a gas station attendant. This one sold used cars. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm nervous to go in to talk to a used car dealer. That's who these people are. They're just regular people that decide to get in government. So go in and tell them if they want to keep that job, they better not poison your food supply.
Oh, that's such great advice. Putting that into perspective, you're so right. And we should get, I know we have our homeschool groups that do this all the time. So really kind of get all of us together to do it all together.
And take your kids, right? That's exactly what we're talking about. That's why I'm here. My mom dragged me to marches on the nuclear power plant outside of Boulder, Colorado. She took me to these things. She took me to the principal's office when the principal didn't want to let me in the school because I wasn't vaccinated. And I watched that argument happen right before my eyes. Don't shelter your kids from these things. This is their training. This is what they refer to when they say, you know what? My mom marched right into the Capitol. My mom went and talked to that principal, and she stood her ground. Those are the things that actually do change the world and do raise that next generation that can do better than we did.
Yeah, that's how I first met you back in January in Albany. I had my son, 6 years old, with me at the Medical Freedom Rally. It was a little terrifying to have him there. There were a few other rallies going on at the time. My in-laws said I was crazy, but you know what? I think he learned from it. We toured the Capitol. We handed our letters in to, the congressman, legislature. I don't know. I was public schooled. I don't know who's there, but I will find out.
Yeah. It doesn't matter that you don't know. Just walk in the door, hand them the letter.
All right. So as we round out, I think the last question I'm going to ask you, Dal, out of all the interviews that you've done on the Highwire, is there anyone that really stuck with you or changed the way that you see the world?
Wow. I can't. Nothing really like pops in as as sort of standing out. There are moments where it's less the person themselves and more someone that puts that final puzzle piece into a puzzle that you've been putting together. And so, one of the interviews that really locked in a lot of COVID for me was the interview I did with Scott Atlas, who was inside the White House working for President Trump during COVID. And the way he told the story about Fauci and Deborah Birx and Robert Redfield, really helped me understand, like just put some dots together that I was having difficulty with. And so that's one that sort of stands out. It was a real bucket list. But then, I got to interview Didier Raoult, who was the first one to talk about hydroxychloroquine in France, and that buttoned up a whole part of the conversation. Those are great interviews. But all along the way, Geert van den Bosch, who I still think we're watching a lot of what he prophesied would be happen. Maybe it's taking longer or slower, but we're just seeing all sorts of carnage from this process. I just feel really honored that on the Highwire, when we started early on, we were sort of, thought to be this radical anti-vaccine group, but more and more, all of the great scientists of the world are seeking us out because we're the only ones that aren't censoring science and scientific speech. And so I'm really proud of all of the interviews that we've done throughout COVID and continue to do. So it'd be hard to say that there was actually a favorite. I find myself being mind blown every single week. And to be clear, what makes Highwire so unique is that we don't really pre-interview these guests. I don't go in knowing what their perspective is. That was sort of our goal with my executive, Jen Sherry, who I brought over from CBS with me. I said, I'm tired of really just getting the interview we already did. I would rather we get that first interview in front of the people. Let's do it live in front of everybody, and let's discover it ourselves. And let's try to put this puzzle together while everyone's watching. And so I think that that's what makes Highwire unique. That and the fact that half of the funding that comes in from people watching goes to sue on the issues that we think are, we're reporting on. I think that that makes it a really unique process and a unique show and a unique approach towards advocacy. So all in all, I feel blessed with the job that I have and the life that we're leading and the progress that we're seeing in the work that we're doing.
Well, I thank you for the interview today and just the work that you do in general. I know my life did a total 180 after watching your show, but in a good way. Very thankful for that. So thank you for all that you do and taking the time today to chat with us. And for anybody who wants to check out Del's show, The Highwire, you stream live every Thursday at 2 o'clock. I know your time zone. No, 2 o'clock my time zone, Eastern
Your
Standard Time.
Eastern, 1 Central, I think 11 a.m. in California where the show started.
Yeah.
Highwire.com, and then you can find everything else that we're doing from there, our nonprofit, ICANDecide.org. But the Highwire is where it's happening.
Yeah, I will link that in the show. You're on Instagram now. I was screen recording things from your show over the last 5 years until you guys must have been shadow banned on Instagram. So you have an account now.
We do.
So I can just share your
See
stuff.
how long it lasts. Meta have never been big fans.
But yes, and you're on Rumble, so you can watch it on Rumble as well. So that's how we're doing it now, my husband and I both.
And the website,
so
like the website always, we built our own streaming player. Our player is even smoother and more fun, I think, in many ways than Rumble or something else. So you can always, no matter what, go to thehighwire.com and see the archive of all of the shows. You can search any topic you want on there and see what we talked about.
Awesome. Thank you, Del.
Thank you. All good.